When we think of nature, we often begin with images of fierce competition claws, teeth, speed, and the relentless logic of eat or be eaten. We imagine that the fastest survive, the strongest dominate, and that only those who stand alone at the top ultimately endure, untouched by dependence or vulnerability. Yet the history of nature tells a far more complex and enduring story. For millions of years, survival has not relied solely on strength or speed, but on systems of connection that are often invisible to the human eye, quietly shaping who lasts and who disappears. In the depths of the ocean, massive predators can be seen holding perfectly still, their jaws wide open, not in preparation for attack, but in a moment of restraint. This is not weakness, it is discipline. It is a deliberate choice to trust a much smaller life for a very practical reason. The cost of constant conflict is too high, and the value of cooperation can be greater than the thrill of domination. The tiny fish that approaches does not flee, because it recognizes a signal that has been repeated across generations. It moves calmly through the predator's mouth, removing parasites and debris, while the tension of hunting disappears entirely. For a brief moment, power gives way to necessity, and survival is shared in the simplest form of agreement: you help me, and I do not harm you. Across the savannas, a similar scene unfolds in broad daylight. Large animals stand quietly under the sun as small birds move across their backs, removing parasites that would otherwise weaken them over time. The bird gains food, the larger animal preserves strength, skin health, and long-term resilience. This is not coincidence, nor kindness, but a survival strategy refined over generations, tested by drought, disease, and the slow mathematics of endurance. In forests, the story goes even deeper, because much of it happens where no camera can easily follow. Beneath the soil, roots and fungi form vast underground networks, exchanging water, nutrients, and chemical messages, allowing entire ecosystems to function as a single living system. What appears separate above ground is, in truth, profoundly connected below, as if the forest were not a collection of individuals, but a community with a shared circulatory system. Along coastlines and rivers, you can find countless smaller versions of the same logic: insects, pollinating plants while feeding themselves, crabs, carrying sea anemones for protection, and cleaner stations, where different species pause their aggression because the shared benefit is greater than the instinct to fight. These repeated patterns reveal a simple truth: nature has never survived alone. If competition and domination were the only strategies for survival, these relationships would have disappeared long ago. Instead, nature has consistently chosen endurance. Through cooperation, sometimes mutual, sometimes uneven, but always governed by one decisive rule: balance must be maintained. Nature does not value morality or intention the way humans do. It values sustainability, efficiency, and structures that can endure, even as environments change. And this quiet strategy is known as symbiosis. Symbiosis can take many forms: mutual benefit, harmless coexistence, and relationships that drift toward parasitism, yet all of them revolve around the same question. Does this connection strengthen life, weaken it, or simply ride alongside it without changing the outcome? Though often unnoticed, symbiosis is one of the most powerful forces, sustaining life on Earth, holding ecosystems together when pressure, scarcity, and change threaten to pull them apart. Chapter 1. Mutual Benefit. Symbiosis is not an exception in nature, but one of its most fundamental survival mechanisms. While strength may differ, survival is often determined by how precisely roles are fulfilled within a relationship, and by how reliably both sides gain something they cannot easily obtain alone. In coral reefs, predators suppress instinct not out of mercy, but calculation. Small fish gain safe nourishment and protection, while larger fish reduce disease, infection, and long-term risk. What matters is not power, but mutual. necessity, an exchange where both sides pay less than they would in isolation. The same principle applies on land. Birds remove parasites, animals conserve energy, and balance is maintained not through dominance, but through clearly defined roles that repeat day after day. Even small advantages, fewer parasites, fewer infections, a little more energy. Saved can decide who survives the next season. Symbiosis is not built on kindness or sacrifice. It begins with need and continues only as long as tangible benefit remains, because in nature, a relationship that stops being useful will eventually stop existing. Chapter 2: Unequal Advantage. Not all symbiotic relationships are equal. In some cases, one organism benefits clearly, while the other neither gains nor loses in any obvious way, and the relationship persists because it does not cross the line into harm. Creatures that attach themselves to whales gain mobility and safety without meaningfully damaging their host. They travel across oceans, reach feeding grounds they could never reach alone, and avoid predators simply by staying close to something enormous. Predators may tolerate scavengers as well, so long as their own survival remains unaffected and their energy losses stay minimal. This form of coexistence persists not because it is fair, but because it causes no damage. Nature allows imbalance only until balance itself is threatened. When advantage becomes burden, when riding along becomes draining, away relationships are swiftly redefined and tolerance becomes resistance. Chapter 3: The Boundary of Parasitism. The line between symbiosis and parasitism is not appearance, but outcome. Parasitism rarely begins with dramatic harm. It advances slowly, draining energy until resilience weakens, turning a stable system into a fragile one. At first, the host may not even notice. The losses are small, spread out over time, hidden beneath ordinary life. But as energy is taken and recovery is reduced, the host becomes less capable of resisting stress, disease, and sudden change. Nature permits parasitism only within narrow limits. When survival of the host is endangered, defenses activate, immune responses intensify, avoidance behaviors appear, and the relationship collapses into conflict. Nature does not judge intent, it judges sustainability. A relationship that destroys its own foundation cannot last, because a parasite cannot survive on a host that no longer lives. Chapter 4: Invisible Networks. The deepest symbiosis often occurs beyond sight, in systems that feel almost like infrastructure rather than individual relationships. Underground networks allow forests to share nutrients, warnings, and recovery mechanisms, helping seedlings survive in shade, supporting stressed trees after drought, and spreading chemical alerts when threats appear. And what makes these networks extraordinary is that they do not require a leader or a plan. They emerge from repeated exchange, then persist because they stabilize the whole system. Much like a well-designed bridge that holds even when individual bolts are replaced, these systems increase resilience by distributing risk and preventing collapse. When individual organisms fail, nature protects structure, not individuals, because structure is what carries life forward when the environment becomes unstable. Chapter 5: Humans within the system. Humans are no exception to these laws. Even when we pretend we are separate from nature, our bodies rely on trillions of microorganisms to regulate digestion, immunity, and metabolism. When that internal ecosystem loses balance, health becomes fragile and small problems can grow into larger ones. Our societies also function as interconnected ecosystems, where imbalance in one area destabilizes the whole. When connections are broken between people, between systems, between humans, and the environment, instability accumulates and eventually returns to us as cost, conflict, and vulnerability. Nature does not seek revenge. It simply reflects the consequences of imbalance, the same way gravity reflects the consequences of ignoring weight and distance. To survive is no longer a question of how much we can take. but how long we can maintain balance within our bodies, within our communities, and within the living world that supports us. Conclusion: nature did not survive by defeating all others. It survived by remaining connected, by building relationships that reduce risk, conserve energy, and increase the odds of endurance across time. Competition creates moments. Connection creates time. If this story has shifted the way you see nature and our place within it, then it has served its purpose. We invite you to share your thoughts in the comments. Where do you see symbiosis in your own life, and what kinds of connections help you endure? If this perspective was meaningful, support the connection through subscribing and liking the video. And if this story deserves a wider audience, share it forward so the conversation can travel beyond this one screen. Nature survives through connection. So does this channel. Closing line recommended. Subscriptions, likes, comments, and shares are the most powerful forms of symbiosis that keep this channel alive.